I need you to understand exactly what a heat dome is, because the term gets used constantly in weather coverage, and I don't think most people have a complete picture of the atmospheric mechanics behind it. And those mechanics are directly responsible for why I'm going to tell you the heat emergency you're experiencing right now is about to get worse, not better. On Saturday, Billings, Montana, hit 111 degrees. Salt Lake City, Utah, hit 109 degrees, breaking its all-time temperature record. Both events happened on the same day. Both events happened because of the same upper-level atmospheric structure, an intensifying ridge of high pressure centered over the western United States, with the Weather Prediction Center now confirming that a secondary resurgence of extreme heat is expected to lock back in across the northern Rockies, Great Basin, and northern plains in the days following July 14th. That secondary resurgence means this: we are not at the end of the second heat dome. We are watching it begin to reload. And AccuWeather forecasters are already warning that the heat dome will gradually shift eastward during the second half of next week, returning dangerous heat and humidity to the mid-Atlantic and northeast. 2 dome passages in 3 weeks. 100 million Americans under extreme heat alerts as I record this. And El Nino, now confirmed by NOAA with an 81% chance of reaching very strong status by fall, has still not expressed its full influence on the atmospheric pattern. I'm going to walk you through the complete physics of what is happening, why it keeps happening, and what it means for your specific region through this week and beyond. This is Sky Report. Let me start with the physics, because understanding the mechanism helps you understand why the heat dome keeps reloading and why scientists are saying the worst is still ahead. A heat dome forms when a blocking high, a persistent strong ridge of high pressure that resists the normal eastward progression of weather systems, builds in the upper atmosphere and anchors itself over a geographic region. The upper level high causes air in the troposphere to sink. As air descends, it compresses under the weight of the atmosphere above it, and compressed air warms, a process called adiabatic warming. The sinking, warming air simultaneously suppresses any upward motion that would form clouds or convection, resulting in cloudless skies that maximize solar radiation reaching the surface. The heat wave is being driven by an intensifying upper-level high-pressure system centered over the western United States, with an upper-level trough approaching the Pacific Northwest. Together, these systems are pushing unusually hot conditions from the Great Basin into the northern plains. The trough approaching the Pacific Northwest is the atmospheric system that is going to eventually break down this western dome, but not before it produces its historic temperature peaks first, and not before the thermal energy it has built up in the atmosphere gets displaced eastward toward the mid-Atlantic and northeast. Temperatures are forecast to be 20 to 30 degrees above average for this time of year, according to CBS News meteorologist Nikki Nolan. At the 850 millibar pressure level, approximately 1 kilometer above the surface, where air temperature most directly influences surface conditions, from Thursday through Sunday, the highest anomalies reached around 10 to 15 degrees Celsius above normal at the 850 millibar level. A 10 to 15 degrees Celsius anomaly at 850 millibars is one of the largest temperature departures from normal that the observational record documents at any pressure level during summer. It represents an air mass that is fundamentally different in character from what the surface infrastructure, the vegetation, the ecology, and the human population in the affected region has evolved to manage. The concept I want you to understand here is thermal feedback. When a heat dome sits over the same region for multiple days, the surface gradually heats. The ground temperature climbs, the near-surface air temperature climbs, and the accumulated heat in the surface layer actually reinforces the high pressure above by warming the air column and increasing atmospheric thickness. Thicker atmospheric columns correspond to higher geopotential heights, which corresponds to more persistent upper-level ridges. The heat dome literally sustains itself through the heat it generates. This is why heat emergencies that last beyond 3 or 4 days tend to be more dangerous than shorter events. The system is self-reinforcing, and each successive day starts with a warmer background state than the day before. Let me walk you through the specific records that were broken this weekend and explain their scientific significance, because all-time records are not just numbers. They represent thresholds that the observational meteorological community has never seen these locations cross before. Salt Lake City hits 109 degrees, setting a new all-time high temperature record. Salt Lake City's previous all-time record was 107 degrees. That record was set in 2002. Before 2002, the Salt Lake City all-time record had been 106 degrees, set in 1960. The pattern there is important. 106 in 1960, 107 in 2002, 109 in 2026. 3 all-time records in 66 years, each one higher than the last, each one occurring during a period of elevated global mean temperature. This is not a coincidence. This is the signal that attribution scientists have been documenting for years. As the baseline atmospheric temperature increases from greenhouse gas forcing, the probability distribution of extreme temperatures shifts upward. Events that were at the edge of the historical distribution in 1960 become more common by 2002. Events that were beyond the historical distribution in 2002 become possible by 2026, and the process does not stop. In Billings, Montana, temperatures are forecast to be as hot as 109 degrees Fahrenheit on Sunday. If the city reaches that mark, it would establish a new record, surpassing the current one of 107 set in 2002. Billings actually reached 111, surpassing that forecast. And Billings, Montana already shattered its all-time temperature record on July 12th, a city at 3,123 feet elevation in the northern Rockies, where the average July high temperature is 84 degrees Fahrenheit, recorded 111 degrees. The departure from average, approximately 27 degrees, is one of the most extreme temperature anomalies ever recorded in a mid-latitude continental interior location during summer in the historical record. Other cities expected to face exceptional heat include Grand Junction, Colorado, where temperatures could climb to 105 degrees, and Casper, Wyoming, where highs may reach 104 degrees. In Casper's case, that would tie the city's all-time high, while Grand Junction's record is 107, set in 2023. Grand Junction's all-time record was set in 2023, just 3 years ago. The pace of record breaking in the western United States is accelerating in ways that are directly consistent with climate projections. I want to spend time on something that creates significant confusion about heat risk, the difference between dry heat in the west and humid heat in the east, and why both are dangerous in completely different ways for completely different physiological reasons. This matters for understanding this specific week's forecast, because as the heat dome moves eastward toward the mid-Atlantic and northeast, it transitions from a dry heat event in the west to a humid heat event. And the shift in hazard character is dramatic. In dry desert climates like Phoenix, Las Vegas, and the Great Basin, the air temperature is extreme, but the relative humidity is very low, often below 10 to 15% at peak afternoon temperatures. This allows sweating to be extremely effective. Sweat evaporates almost instantly, carrying significant heat away from the body. A person who is adequately hydrated in Phoenix at 115 degrees with 8% relative humidity is losing heat effectively through evaporation. The danger in that environment comes from dehydration. If fluid intake does not match the rate of sweat loss, evaporative cooling fails and core temperature begins to rise. The Phoenix Fire Department response to daily heat stroke emergencies across the entire city reflects how many people underestimate their fluid needs under those conditions. In humid climates like the Gulf Coast, the Mid-Atlantic, and the Northeast, the mechanism is completely different. Relative humidity at 85% means that the air is already carrying most of the water vapor it can hold. When you sweat into air that is already nearly saturated with moisture, the evaporation rate is dramatically reduced. Your sweat does not evaporate. It sits on your skin. Your body cannot cool itself effectively through sweating even if you are fully hydrated. The heat index, the combined thermal sensation of temperature and humidity, reflects this. A 95-degree temperature with 80% relative humidity produces a heat index of approximately 113 degrees Fahrenheit. The body experiences the equivalent thermal stress of 113-degree dry heat from only 95 degrees of actual temperature. High humidity will also prevent overnight lows from dropping below 75 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which adds to heat stress for tens of millions from the Great Plains across the Mississippi Valley and the southeast U.S. to the northeast United States. The overnight low is the physiological recovery window. In dry western heat, even 90-degree nighttime temperatures allow some recovery because evaporative cooling remains partially functional. In humid eastern heat, 80-degree nights with 75% relative humidity mean that the body's heat dissipation is still impaired overnight. Each morning begins with a heat debt carried forward from the previous day, and that cumulative debt over multiple days is what produces the most severe heat casualties. I want to be very precise about what is meant by the secondary resurgence that the WPC is flagging, because I think it is important to distinguish this from a simple continuation of the current heat dome. A secondary resurgence of extreme heat is expected to lock back in across the northern Rockies, Great Basin, and northern plains in the days following July 14th, with the WPC flagging continued high risk for the northern plains and upper Mississippi Valley into July 16th. This secondary resurgence is not just the current dome persisting. It reflects a specific feature of the blocking pattern in which the ridge over the western United States, rather than progressively weakening as the approaching Pacific Northwest trough undercuts it, actually undergoes a partial rebuild. The trough approaching from the Pacific intensifies the jet stream on its eastern flank, and that intensification can, under the right conditions, amplify the ridge to its south rather than eroding it. This pattern, sometimes called retrogression or ridge rebuilding, is one of the most challenging phenomena in extended range weather forecasting, and it is precisely why the WPC is flagging continued risk beyond July 14th, rather than forecasting a clean break. The practical implication is this: people in the northern Rockies, Great Basin, and northern plains, who may be expecting significant relief to arrive by Tuesday or Wednesday based on last week's forecast, trends need to update that expectation. The heat is not departing on schedule. The WPC's continued high-risk flag through July 16th means the atmospheric pattern is sustaining an anomalously warm thermal regime in these regions beyond what a straightforward passage of the approaching trough would predict. Meanwhile, the eastward displacement of the dome toward the mid-Atlantic and northeast, where the peak is expected on Wednesday, represents the normal eventual progression of the ridge as the western trough finally forces it to move. But normal progression for this dome means 100-plus heat index values returning to Philadelphia, Washington, and New York within 48 hours. I want to make sure I communicate clearly about the larger pattern context, because the July heat dome, as historic as it is not necessarily the peak heat event of the 2026 season. The current El Niño, which formed last month and is too young to have affected this heat wave much, is expected to rank as among the most intense since the Weather Service began tracking the phenomena in 1950. By fall, it has an 81% chance of becoming very strong, the top category, according to NOAA. Too young to have affected this heat wave much. That sentence is the key to understanding the rest of the summer. The first heat dome, which killed 44 people and set 148 records, occurred before El Niño's atmospheric influence was fully established. The second heat dome, which has broken all-time records in Billings and Salt Lake City, is occurring as El Niño's influence is in its earliest stages of atmospheric expression. The El Niño that NOAA gives an 81% chance of reaching very strong status by fall has not yet driven the reorganization of the global atmospheric circulation that very strong El Niño events historically produce. The mechanism by which El Niño amplifies heat in the continental United States is through its influence on the jet stream. When El Niño warming in the equatorial Pacific reaches sufficient intensity, it changes the location and strength of the subtropical jet stream in ways that tend to favor persistent ridging over the western United States. That ridging produces exactly the kind of blocking high-pressure pattern that has been generating these heat domes. As El Niño strengthens through August and September, the tendency for ridge persistence over the west increases. The heat domes that occur in August and September during strong El Niño years tend to be more persistent than their July predecessors, because the atmospheric forcing for the blocking pattern is stronger. At the same time, drought will expand and merge with the already severe conditions gripping western Nebraska, western Kansas, and northeast Colorado, creating one continuous zone of stress from the Rockies to the plains. Drought expansion is both a consequence of and a contributor to the heat dome pattern. Dried soil has dramatically lower thermal inertia than moist soil. It heats faster during the day and cools faster at night. But the net effect during sustained heat dome conditions is higher daytime maximum temperatures, because no energy is being consumed in evaporating soil moisture. As drought expands under the heat dome, the land surface becomes an amplifier of the atmospheric forcing rather than a moderator of it. Forecasts call for the North American monsoon to bring thunderstorms to parts of Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado, but some of those storms may produce little rainfall. Known as dry thunderstorms, they can ignite new wildfires when lightning strikes parched vegetation. I want to explain the dry thunderstorm mechanism because it is a phenomenon that most people don't understand intuitively, and that is responsible for some of the most dangerous wildfire ignitions of every summer in the western United States. A dry thunderstorm is a convective storm that develops at high altitude, typically when the middle and upper atmosphere become unstable due to differential heating, while the lower atmosphere remains dry and hot. Rain forms in the storm's updraft and falls from the cloud base just as in a normal thunderstorm, but the subcloud layer, the air between the cloud base and the ground, is so dry and hot that the rain evaporates completely before reaching the surface. This evaporation produces a phenomenon visible on radar called a virga, streaks of precipitation trailing from cloud bases that end before they reach the ground. The problem is that lightning does reach the ground. The storm produces lightning even though it produces no rainfall at the surface, and lightning strikes on drought-dry vegetation in 10% relative humidity, in temperatures above 100 degrees, in terrain that hasn't received meaningful rainfall in months. That is how a single thunderstorm with no rain can ignite dozens of simultaneous fires across a wide geographic area. This is the specific wildfire threat that the monsoon season transition, which is expected to begin in the southwest by late July, will produce in the context of this summer's exceptional heat and drought. The Summit Fire near Los Angeles, which burned nearly 3,000 acres and forced evacuations this weekend, gives you the template. In California, the Summit Fire in the Antelope Valley temporarily forced people outside Los Angeles to evacuate as it burned nearly 3,000 acres. That fire started on terrain that was dried to critical levels by the heat dome, in conditions where fire spread rates were extreme and fire behavior was erratic. As the monsoon's dry thunderstorm season approaches and the heat dome's drought footprint expands, the number of simultaneous fire ignitions across the West is going to increase dramatically. Let me give you the meteorologically precise day-by-day picture for the rest of this week so you have the most accurate mental map possible. Today, Monday, July 14th, the upper-level high-pressure center is positioned near southern Nevada, with the 500 millibar ridge axis oriented roughly northwest to southeast across the western United States. Surface temperatures from the Great Basin through the northern plains are in their peak range for this dome. The trough, approaching the Pacific Northwest, is beginning to interact with the ridge's northwestern flank. This is the beginning of the forcing that will eventually move the dome eastward. For the northern tier, today represents peak or near-peak heat. Tuesday, July 15th, the approaching trough forces the ridge axis to shift slightly eastward. The northern tier begins a very gradual moderation, but critically, the WPC's continued high-risk flag through July 16th means the moderation is slower than many current model runs are showing. The central and eastern plains begin to see the leading edge of the ridge's influence. Kansas City, St. Louis, and Chicago heat indices begin to climb. Wednesday, July the 16th is the day I'm focused on for the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. The ridge's eastward displacement and the surface flow pattern will drive the warmest, most humid air mass of the week into the I-95 corridor. Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and New York City are all in the heat index warning zone for Wednesday. The combination of high dew points in the low to mid-70s Fahrenheit with temperatures in the upper 90s will produce heat index values of 105 to 110 degrees across the urban corridor. Beyond Wednesday, the WPC's guidance shows continued elevated heat risk across the northern plains through July 16th, with eventual moderation arriving from the north. But moderation does not mean a summer heat pattern ends. El Niño-driven ridging over the western United States is expected to remain the dominant atmospheric feature through August and September. For the northern plains, Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho, today is your peak heat day. Monitor your local NWS office actively. Know the location of your nearest cooling center. Check on elderly and isolated neighbors today, not tomorrow. Avoid outdoor activities from 10 a.m. through 7 p.m. For the desert Southwest, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Palm Springs, the heat is relentless and the duration is extending. Phoenix has now recorded multiple consecutive days above 110 degrees without dropping below 90 overnight. Cold water immersion therapy is being used daily by Phoenix firefighters. Hydrate aggressively. Minimum 1 cup of water every 15 to 20 minutes during any outdoor exposure. Do not rely on thirst as a warning signal under these conditions. It is insufficient and unreliable under extreme heat stress. For the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast facing Wednesday's peak, prepare today. If you do not have reliable air conditioning, identify a cooling center and have a plan to be there Wednesday afternoon. If you have elderly neighbors or family members, make contact with them today and have a specific plan for Wednesday. Know the signs of heat stroke, confusion, hot and dry skin, rapid strong pulse, potential loss of consciousness. This is a 911 emergency, not a sit-and-wait situation. Call immediately. All-time temperature records broken in Billings and Salt Lake City. 100 million Americans under extreme heat alerts right now. The heat dome shifting east toward Wednesday's Mid-Atlantic and Northeast peak. 200 people airlifted from a Missouri summer camp in simultaneous flash flooding. The summit fire burning near Los Angeles. El Niño strengthening toward very strong status by fall. Secondary heat resurgence flagged by WPC through July the 16th. And scientists saying explicitly that the current El Niño was too young to have affected the first heat dome much, meaning the atmospheric pattern that killed 44 people and set 148 records in late June and early July has not yet expressed its full influence. Hit subscribe on Sky Report and turn your notifications fully on. I'm tracking this heat dome's eastward progression every day through Wednesday and watching the western reload through July 16th. Share version 1 of this video with people in your community who need the human story, the practical, life-saving information about checking on neighbors and finding cooling centers. Share version 2 with people who want to understand the atmospheric science behind why this keeps happening. Both versions tell the same truth. The worst heat is still ahead, and the time to prepare is right now. Hit that like button so this reaches more people before Wednesday. We'll see you in the next forecast.